It's a unique topic that you don't see a lot of people focused on, but that everybody has.
Anne and I met as a result of the fact that Anne had given birth to me, and then gave me up for adoption. And so we reunited 27 years later. And when we first met, we found that we had this sort of shared interest in trying to figure out like why people are behaving the way they are, what's going on in organizations from that perspective.
Not just, what does the individual leader or employee need or entrepreneur need, but what has to be in place in order for the business and people in it to achieve its potential.
All right. Well, Heather, Ann, I wanted to say thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to have the conversation with us. And I wanted to start just by getting maybe a perspective from each of you on what's the backstory here? Like, what is it that you guys are helping clients with, and how did you end up on that? Because I find it interesting. It's a unique topic that you don't see a lot of people focused on, but that everybody has.
Yeah, Anne and I have actually, we're celebrating 25 years this fall in business together. And we definitely have a little bit of a different backstory. When Anne and I first met, I was working in organizational consulting with one of the big consulting firms. And Anne was working as a psychotherapist and a corporate therapist slash coach, kind of at that sort of the early stage of that. And Anne and I met as a result of the fact that Anne had given birth to me, and then gave me up for adoption. And so we reunited 27 years later. And when we first met, we found that we had this sort of shared interest in trying to figure out like why people are behaving the way they are, what's going on in organizations from that perspective, and how do we really help people and their organizations to be able to achieve their potential. So 3 years after we met, we launched our business, and here we are 25 years later, still helping organizations and individuals to navigate the challenges of dysfunction and development, and how to really go after what it is that we are innately capable of achieving in our lives.
And just to add a little bit of flavor to that about how we approach things, Heather and I are based on our personality types, and we do a lot of work with personality type and brain organization as well. But we're always seeking that next thing in terms of what do people need and how are we growing, and at a time when holistic health was starting to come into mainstream, Heather and I looked at what we were going to do in terms of our entrepreneurial business from more of that holistic perspective of not just, what does the individual leader or employee need or entrepreneur need, but what has to be in place in order for the business and people in it to achieve its potential, and going at it from Heather's background in consulting and my background in psychotherapy. We approached it more from that people and systems and getting those into alignment and working together to achieve the kind of results that we're all capable of achieving when we're not operating out of dysfunctional patterns of behavior,
It's just so
which of course we're likely to do.
well, yeah, and it's just so interesting that I think everybody can speak to the fact that whether it's their own life or their business, there's some level of dysfunction in it. So I've never seen consultants that say, "Hey, this is what we're tackling." And are you guys focused then on, you talked a lot about kind of that partnership between the people and the place. Is it truly like an underlying personality thing? Like, well, hey, let's understand the people, or what are like the common problems and the ways you approach addressing dysfunction?
Well, I think, one of the things we like to say is that dysfunction is normal. Like it's not this dirty word. It's to your point, it's like anytime there's the opportunity for things to be functional, there's the opportunity for it to be dysfunctional. And so we look at it from that perspective of really understanding the people and what it is that's going on in individual behavior, what's driving individual behavior that contributes to that dysfunction. But we also look at it from a systems perspective. Like there's only so much we can do by changing and shaping an individual. And so we have to look at what's missing in the organization's systems or in the individuals, even the individual systems, that is contributing to that dysfunction. So for example, we have a client where they like to talk about the issues over and over and over again, and nobody likes to make a decision. So in order to move them out of that dysfunction, is actually having a structure that they follow that flags them. Okay, we've talked about this issue 3 times now. We need to go through these steps to push ourselves through to make that decision. And so we're looking at things, so we're trying to address the behavior, but we're also trying to make it more structured and easier for folks to follow, so that they can also break some of these habits that they have, because they are afraid in that moment to actually go about making the decision. So we're always sort of working both sides of the equation, because it's never just about a person. It's always about what is going on in that ecosystem, within that organization, or within that relationship, within that function. You can sort of break it down to all different places. Happens inside of family organizations as well, right? In the home. And so it's always some combination of looking at the behavior and looking at the systems that are needed to support.
Well, I was thinking of another dysfunctional formation caused by the type of leader that's more impulsive in their decision making. Sort of at that other end of the scale, where we have clients who they'll make decisions and then the result will come out not the way they want it to be. And then they'll blame somebody, and that person will be let go, and then they'll repeat the pattern all over again. So they're never really looking at, what is the system that needs to be in place in order to manage our decision-making process. And so you can have either side of the scale, and we find that a lot, especially between leaders whose personalities lean more toward that autocratic type of behavior, and those other ones that tend to move in that direction of permissive behavior, and just a sort of anything goes approach to not leading their people.
And you mentioned in the initial answer this idea of like people finding their true self and that self-actualization. How does operating inside a system or a family that's dysfunctional stop us from reaching that?
That's a wonderful question.
I do my best.
Oftentimes we have to move out of our family system in order to really achieve our potential, because of the limitations it imposes. However, having said that, it's recognizing that human behavior is adaptive, because we need to survive. And when one person in a family system, for example, wakes up and becomes aware that they're playing a role in the family, and so for example, someone playing the role of the rescuer in the family, and they're always there for everybody else's issues, and they realize suddenly, and possibly through feedback from others, that they're not attending to their own needs, and they're sacrificing too much, and there will be a lot of resistance from the entire family unit for to keep that person in place, because if one person grows, everybody is either forced to grow themselves in response to that. You remove a rescuer, and other people will have to take responsibility. Or they won't, they'll find somebody else to rescue them, and the other person will, in essence, feel like there's no place for them in the family. However, when a family goes into family therapy, for example, and working with the whole system in that way, or in leadership, when you work with a leadership team in that way and look at how leaders rescue their employees, you have the same dynamic. Everybody has to be prepared to shift their behavior in order for it to work, or that one person has to leave. And whether it's an employee or whether it's a family member, that has to create some distance from the family to break their pattern.
So I guess along those lines, Heather, I'll direct this one to you. If we think about it in that respect, that almost you have to create that space. So say I'm an employee, or I'm like not the leader in my family structure. Is truly the only way sometimes to get that enlightenment is to leave the situation and find elsewhere? Or how can I help direct maybe some more functionality in the space that I'm in?
And one of the things we always talk to our clients about is, as Anne had mentioned, our behavior is really adaptive, and it comes out of that, us starting off our lives as children, learning how to survive our environment. And so we know how to do that survival thing really well. But when we're starting to actually want to move towards our potential, we have to become aware of what those survival habits are that we've got sort of hardwired into our brains so that we can start to work that development. And you can do that while you're still in that system. So for example, I'll talk about one of our clients where we have them understand what are those automatic negative thoughts, what are those internal conversations that they have going on with themselves that are a result of how they were conditioned when they were children. So for example, you're too much, you're overwhelming, you talk too much, who do you think you are, know your place. Like, these are all things, that messages that we took in as children, that as adults we continue to bring them out and play them out as though they are still real. So in this case, for one of our clients, where she had a very autocratic, devaluing boss, and she really wanted to stay. She really wanted to stay in the environment she's in. She'd been with the company for a long time, but she always felt like there was something wrong with her. So she was working twice as hard as everybody else on the executive team. And it was really constantly hitting at her confidence. So what we did in her case was that learning to set some boundaries, right? That's about him, it's not about me. So changing that inner dialogue, you can, and also, even she got really good at saying, you need to not talk to me like that. And so he started to shift because she wasn't allowing him anymore, or tolerating the way in which that conversation was going. So it is possible in those situations, but you have to be willing to do the work on yourself and not make it about the other person. Because I think that's one of the things we see a lot, right? It's so easy to say, well, it's them, they need to change, it's all their fault. But the fact is that if we want to change the dynamic that we're in, the work actually starts with ourselves, and it starts a lot around from that place of what is going on inside of us in our conversations that's leading to this adaptive survival behavior.
It's difficult, right? Because if it's, especially, and maybe not more so, but in family situations where you've kind of been conditioned to think this about yourself, or have those negative self-thoughts, how do you talk to people about getting past that? Because one thing that I feel like I always struggled with was, how do I even know what my potential really is, or how do I know what I'm truly capable of, especially in an environment where maybe you have been put down, or you're focused on other people. How do you talk to people about identifying what their passion is and then fulfilling that potential?
Jordan, what I was saying earlier about following needs, you see, it's looking at a situation like that in a family where the person who has an interest in achieving their potential needs a system around them to support them through times of uncertainty, for example, where they're really not sure, and they're going to be doing exploring and experimenting and trying new things. And so if you look at it from that needs perspective of stepping out of a non-supportive family system, and first of all, gathering a support system around you. And it's because it's never all or nothing. It's we can step out and make new friends. And in the example of the caretaker, the caretaker might just build relationships with friends where they're caretaking them as well. It's being able to have the courage to step out and create a system around you with people in it that are there for you and are going to do some cheerleading and supporting and encouraging, where in your family you might be told, you'll never amount to anything. This is the only thing that you'll ever aspire to. And those sorts of messaging, they're all to keep the family unit intact. It's the agenda of, some parents to keep their kids small so that they never leave because they don't want to be alone. And many of these behaviors are unconscious, but it starts out with, as Heather's saying, that awareness of, myself, and I need to do something different. This is not working for me. What do I actually need? and then going and setting about to explore it, not just thinking one day I'm going to wake up and go, oh, my true potential is, you know,
Right.
it does it evolves. In my case, it was, I just want to help people, and I found a way. I started out in a very different place as a massage therapist than I ended up in, but it started with, that's my potential and that's my passion, is to help people.
If can I just
Please,
add to what she
please.
said? Because I think this is part of what we take our clients through in some of the programs that we offer for them is that aspect of self-awareness, right? And as Anne had mentioned, we do a lot of work with personality type. And in the work that we do, we help people understand how their brain is organized. And so therefore, what are some of those unique talents that they have because of their personality organization? And what is it that really drives them from, as Anne said, the needs, right? What's driving that behavior? What is the need that has to be satisfied in them for them to really be able to move into that place of self-actualizing? So coming from an understanding of that. So for example, I'll talk about my daughter in this one, because my daughter is from a personality perspective. So in our language, she's a performer intellectual. Myers-Briggs language, she's an ENTP. She's what we call a performer. So she has a need to be recognized, to be out on the stage and to be seen. And when she was 2 and we were sitting on a patio and somebody was playing the guitar singing, and she said to me, Mom, I want to go sing. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to be the parent that discourages the kid, right? I'm going to go say, okay, well, if you have to go ask him though. So if this matters to you, you go ask him. And so she did. The only song she could sing was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. But so there's a glimmer, like you think about it as children, right? Before we have any of these constructs on us about, what we can and can't do, what we should and shouldn't do, and the role we play in all of those things, as Anne talked about, is you think back to that, right? We as grown-ups have to go back to that and sort of, as Anne's saying, what's that passion? What's that thing that always we sort of naturally gravitated towards? When we understand our personality combined with those things, and we start to have that conversation with ourselves about, what is my desired future state? What would really make me feel satisfied? What gives me joy and really builds my confidence? And it is a journey from that perspective. And what goes on in our heads though is this conversation where there's a part of our brain that knows it, right? Innately, that intuition that says, I see it, I want this, I want, this is what my dreams are, my hopes, whatever it is. And then there's the part of our brain that goes, oh no, you don't. Stay safe, stay in your place. Who do you think you are? And we stop listening at some point. For many of us, if we get into that listening more to the part of our brain that's telling us to play it safe, because that's the way our brain's wired, is for survival, versus the part of our brain that really knows and sees, even if it's like Anne said, just, I know I need to help, even if it's just my daughter knowing somehow she needs to be on a stage, even if singing isn't her true talent, there's just that driving need. She has to be up in front of people on a stage. And so but we don't give ourselves that time and space. And to Anne's point, sometimes when we have that, we're brave enough to share with someone, oh, I really want this, or I'd like to do this. We share that with the wrong person, and they tell you all the reasons why you can't do that. My ex-husband was brilliant at that. You can't make a living doing that. What are you talking about? Other people do. Why can't I? Right. So
well, it's kind of that same point, that Anne mentioned about subconsciously some parents want to keep their kids small. I think some people in our lives like, well, I don't want to see you succeed because that shows my insecurities, right? So then once we get past the understanding portion, it's like, well, I know what my passion is, I know what it is I want to do. Now we have that second voice you were talking about, that imposter syndrome, to say, well, who am I to actually step into it? How do we go about navigating those waters and saying, you know what, yeah, it is scary and people are going to judge me, but that's okay, because this is what I want.
One of the core aspects and core exercises that we need to practice in any reframing or rewiring the brain, Jordan, is that we have to know where we're focusing our attention and what voice we're paying attention to. and you know, in the practice of mindfulness, what that teaches us is that we can develop an observing self, where when we find ourselves focusing on that imposter syndrome story and all of the lies that we tell ourselves, that we can actually direct it. And as Heather was saying about that desired future state, it's redirecting the brain toward the future, and that can feel unnatural for a lot of people, because along with, you know, conforming and excessive adaptation, they gave up their ability to imagine anything that could possibly be different. And that's the first thing that people have to start playing with their imagination again, and just, you know, brainstorming for themselves, or brainstorming all of the things that are possible, and knowing that that little saboteur is just going to jump in and try and shut the whole thing down with the self-doubt and all of the negative self-talk. But we have to keep redirecting our brain to our desired future state, instead of getting hijacked by this voice that's trying to keep us safe. And you can see, as I'm talking about that we have these two agendas. One is around security, and the other is for our potential. And we can do war with these two agendas throughout our entire life, you know, and we're never too old to take on this challenge. It's really important.
And I think that's a powerful message too, right? Because some people think, I mean, I think it all the time. It's like, you see, whether it be on social media, it's like, you know, people that have found success at early ages. It's like, oh, well, I'm too late. I'm already past, you know, what I should be doing right now. And it's like, those measurements of success that we put on ourselves are just arbitrary sometimes.
Truly.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's this idea that we all sort of come into sort of that evolution on the same trajectory, right? And so it's that pace and space, and you know, as Anne pointed out too, is we also evolve, right? Like, you know, if you think about us as human beings, we had these experiences, and now we're incorporating those experiences. And sometimes it's that an experience that we happen to have that kind of sets us on a little bit of a different path. I mean, when Anne and I first started working together, all of our work was in organizations. We weren't talking about things, well, mine was, Anne was working in private practice, but we weren't talking about the imposter syndrome. And here we are now. It's core and fundamental to the work that we do, because it is, you know, what the stats are, something like 75% of successful individuals struggle with the imposter syndrome. And we see it in our clients. And so as part of our desire to always solution things and be ahead of what our clients need, we started to get into that more specifically and to drill down into it. And so, you know, if I look back on sort of where we were 25 years ago to now, our business has completely evolved. And that is part of our growth and our journey, and what we can bring to our clients as well. So I think there's no time. And the last thing I want to say is, I'm amazed actually at the number of people that I've come across in the last 2 years who are in their 60s and 70s becoming entrepreneurs for the first time. Like that just says that there's, you know, the opportunity is always there. There's no such thing as, you know, having that window closed. But it's one of the things we tell ourselves. So we joke about this. Our brain tells us lies to keep us safe, right? Oh, it's too late. I can't possibly do it. Or, you know, all of those things that again just hold us into that status quo that our brain loves so much.
I want to take a peek behind the curtain here, because you guys we've talked a little bit about individuals finding their passion and then taking steps to fulfill that. And you guys did it by creating this business, but you also did it within the dynamics of not only the business aspect, but family relations that are interesting, to say the least. So how did you guys say, hey, I want to take this leap, not only to build this relationship, but then also build a business together?
Part of it's our personality type, because we don't necessarily go, oh, gee, I wonder if we do this, what issues are going to have. It just seemed like such an exciting idea, and so right. You know, when something just feels right, and both of us have that tendency to honor that. When something feels right to us, we'll go along with it. And, you know, when Heather and I met, neither one of us had the expectation that we were all of a sudden going to morph into this mother-daughter relationship and, you know, be the long lost person to each other. fulfill something like that in each other, and much more pragmatic around our relationship, and the fact that our friendship was first and foremost, and finding common ground, which we had a lot of. There's so many things that we enjoy doing. We're both very active, and we both had such a keen interest in, as Heather said, why people do what they want to do. And both of us having that confidence of, I might not know, but we'll figure it out as we go. And those are essential ingredients for any entrepreneur, whether it's solo or together. It's being able to step out there and feel a certain degree of comfort in stepping out and not knowing what the end is going to be, using that vision. I see it. If I see it, then I can create it.
Heather, what was your perspective on all
Yeah,
that?
I was gonna say, that being said, it wasn't all sunshine and
No.
So, because if you think about it, learning to be an entrepreneur and growing a business is challenging. Building a relationship with your biological mother, your biological daughter, as adults, because I was an adult by that point in time, while you're learning how to be an entrepreneur. And we were trying to mix our two areas of expertise, and we were in two different cities at the same time. So we didn't even live, we were living across the country for each other. So it was challenging. It was challenging to learn, especially for me, because I'm fairly conflict avoidant. So, and not particularly directive in my communications. And so, really having to learn how to be in a partnership where I could really speak my mind and speak it from that perspective of, not being concerned about the impact that it would have on the relationship, because everything was sort of mixed together, right? In a way. And so, we had to navigate that, and it was a steep learning curve at times. And, sort of try. And it was funny because when we first started, we didn't tell anybody that we were related. Like,
Wow.
nobody knew our story,
No
right?
one
So
knew.
it was just, this is my business partner who magically morphed out of nowhere. And a few clients along the way would say, well, you and Ann, you have a lot of mannerisms that are the same. Like, are you related? And we'd sort of just sort of smile and laugh. And of course, now we talk about our story all the time, right? But at the time, because everything was so new still, right? And so there were things that we did to feel safe, and decisions we made. And when we look back on it now, it's sort of like, oh, we really didn't need to do that. But it's so we found our ways to sort of be out on that risk, but still make sure we were doing it in a way that we felt safe enough and stable enough, that we could keep moving ahead. But yeah, it's been a journey. We've learned a lot. And of course, we use our family as our petri dish for all of the work that we do. We try everything out on them. So we've got great stories about our family because of it.
Well, of course. And it has to help from a client perspective to be like, well, when you tell that story, I mean, you would have to just assume that there's a level of dysfunction and all that. I mean, so it's like,
truly.
Yeah.
as a client, I'd be like, oh, if you guys can get through that, building a business and doing that
Yeah.
relationship, then you can certainly help us out.
Yeah.
Well, it was us we were creating normal, because there was no roadmap for us. We had no roles to fall back on to say, okay, well, here are the relationship rules of a mother-daughter that have been separated for 27 years. And so we have to make it up as we go along.
That's pretty cool.
Mhm.
So we've talked about it from an individual perspective. We talked about it from your guys's. I want to take a step to look at, for leaders and in a leadership role, how do I recognize that my systems aren't working, that there is dysfunction? I recognize it, and now I want to address it. What are those first steps outside of just hiring you guys that we can say, is it fall back to like that self-awareness, like, hey, I should take accountability for what I've set up here, or what does that look like?
We always say the first thing to look at is, what are you complaining about, and what are others complaining about? Because that's where it starts. That it comes into our awareness that something is dysfunctional is because we're complaining, but we're not doing anything to resolve what it is we're complaining about. We're complaining about that person, or we're complaining that stuff's not being done on time, or it's not being done right, or whatever it is that we're complaining about. That is the place that we always start with our clients, is make the list of the things that you've been complaining about. I mean, I think with one of our clients, we laughed because they said they've been complaining about some of this stuff for 10 years. So that's perpetual dysfunction, right? Because they, at some point in time, because they don't know how to navigate out of it, so they act like they're powerless, and all of the energy goes into complaining. So we want to shift, make that list of what you're complaining about, and then we have to look at, okay, what's the actual issue, right? So what is the actual issue that is leading to that symptom that I'm complaining about? And then once we know the issue, then what might solve for it? Again, from a development perspective, from a systems perspective, from a what do I need to do as a leader, and how am I contributing to this? Because I guarantee you, in every organization where there's dysfunction, the leader is contributing to that dysfunction. As much as they like to blame their employees or blame others, it's us as the leaders that are ultimately accountable for eliminating that which leads to these things that we complain about. We're the ones that have the power to do something.
Well, and that's where it's like, I know I fall into this a lot. It's like, it's almost like an ego shot if you have to admit that something's wrong. It's like, well, I built this thing, and it's like, if something's wrong, does that mean it's a reflection of me and my, lack of capabilities? So, and what are some of the common things that that represent the dysfunction from somebody's team? Or is it always back to like, hey, just if there's something flawed in the system, and it's like, those complaints highlight it, or are there actual common themes that you see amongst all your clients?
Well, we tend to see a lot of common dysfunctions that in addition to the dysfunction of a lack of accountability, there's the dysfunction of permissiveness, and some of these morph into each other. There's a dysfunction of silos, the dysfunctions created by matriarchal leaders. Heather, you can jump in and throw some more in. But
Chaos is the one.
chaos,
Chaos in
yes.
entrepreneurial organizations where you've
Yeah.
got leaders who don't really want to grow up. We call it Peter Pan syndrome in your organizations, because the leaders, they'll make statements like, well, I don't want a hierarchy. I want to keep my organization flat,
Yes.
and I don't want rules, and yet when the organization gets to a certain point, you have to do all of those things in order for you not to create dysfunction in your organization. So the dysfunction of chaos is one, because we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and founder-led or family-owned businesses. And so that's a really common one that we come across.
It really is.
That one hurts, because that's whenever I first took over a family business of ours, that was the big thing. I was like, hey, we don't need roles. We don't need titles, because that just creates. And then you realize, well, then nobody knows who to go to with their question.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I was like,
Well,
oh, well, that was,
exactly.
yeah. You learn baptism by fire is a real thing too.
Yep, for sure.
And just to add to what Heather was saying earlier about, with leaders and how they contribute, is sometimes leaders need to recognize they can't just do the knee-jerk blaming and use the same language that they've always used. And to give you an example of that, a leader they can go into, and some of our clients will own this, where they'll actually say to an employee, why are you doing it that way? That's ridiculous. And that this knee-jerk language that some of them have, because they tend to operate at this breakneck speed, and they don't want to slow down long enough to really coach their people. And then they blame their people for not keeping up and not take responsibility or accountability for the fact that both the way they're talking to their people and not spending enough time with their people is actually what's contributing to the issues around accountability and poor performance.
So what does the process look like if someone's working with you all? Is it, I won't even make assumptions. Just talk me through, if I'm hiring you, how do we start to address that dysfunction? What do those steps look like?
So the place that we always start is what we call discovery, and whether we're working with an individual or with an organization, right? It's there's that piece where we have to ask the questions and get at the information to really understand what the individual or the leaders that we're working with are saying, what's going on, or what their challenges are that they're experiencing, and are coming in and actually understanding what's behind it. So again, that's part of what's really important, is that people can talk about what they're experiencing and how that's working or not working for them, but that's where people struggle, is to make that connection of, okay, so then why is this happening, and then what do we do about it? And that's really kind of at the essence is the process. So once we understand the what it is that are the symptoms of this dysfunction, we then come in and do the analysis around the why and what's driving it. We look at, again, the people, everything from their personality and how their collective behavior, their competency levels. We look at their their systems, their leadership systems and processes that they have in place from an organizational perspective, and then we come out with the recommendations as to what do we need to do in order to get that. So we've got lots of executive teams, for example, that we've worked with, where they meet, but they have no structure, no real process for meeting. They're always so busy that they cancel half of the meetings, and then try and catch up after the fact, or they're not actually asking people to bring information to them in a way that they can make decisions. So they become really inefficient. They get frustrated because they spend way too much time talking about things that aren't that important, because they can feel like they're in control of it, and then ignore the really important stuff that they should be focused on. So in that case, and then there's conflicts and fighting, and there's a lack of alignment, which then leads to silos. So that's a normal situation for us to see within an executive team. And so the first thing we do when we talk about leadership systems is we look at, okay, let's look at your meeting practices. And what is the cadence that makes sense? How often do you need to meet? How long? What goes on the agenda? What stays off the agenda? How do you come to decisions in the meeting? And so we start to put that structure around them, so that they learn how to behave. So I can't just say to them, oh, get better at your meetings. We actually have to give them the structure to follow, so they can build new habits around their meetings. And we will sometimes sit in and facilitate their meetings until they get to the place where they can do it themselves. So the solution does, sort of, some of them are sort of straightforward to do. Some of them are a little bit more challenging and more time-based, because we are getting rid of bad habits. When we talk about dysfunction, there's an aspect where people have let it go on for so long, it's now just a habit, right? It's a habit not to speak up, or it's a habit to argue. We have a client where, when one of the executives doesn't like what they're planning on doing, he keeps asking the same questions over and over again, and making them bring it back to the table to discuss it again. I think he's trying to wear them down all the time. But it's a dysfunction, right? It's him trying to be in control, and nobody's recognizing that this is his power play and they need to stop it, right? And so, working with the CEO to be able to recognize it for what it is, and make the call, and to hold the course. Those sorts of things take time and practice to really embed and shift out of the dysfunction.
Well, in thinking about clients and their mindset, it's the only thing that I would add around. Most people would be surprised at some of the beliefs and the mindset that leaders harbor about what they can and can't do. And even in the example that Heather brings around leaders on an executive team not knowing that they can actually say to a peer, you've brought that up 3 times now, we're not going to table it again. We're not going to entertain it again. Is that my place? You see, and these fixed ideas and beliefs about what they can and cannot do, even to the point of some leaders will say, is it okay to give an employee feedback about their attendance? Is it okay to flag for them that they need to develop in certain areas if they want to grow their career? But what they will do is they'll sit down and they'll complain about how entitled employees are, and how they expect that they're just going to be promoted and their career trajectory is running. but the leader is hands off and they're not doing anything to dispel the notion that they have to do these specific things and develop in these areas because they're not quite sure if that's their place or if they have that authority.
Where does that come from? Where do those limiting beliefs about what someone can or can't do come from?
From the self-protective system, mostly. It's the same as where the imposter syndrome. I'm too afraid to put myself out as an authority, and I don't want to be seen as being mean. I want to be seen as the nice guy or gal. I want to be perceived as always being supportive. So I'm never going to deliver difficult information or corrective or developmental information because that might upset someone. And so it's very emotionally driven, although these same leaders would say, oh, I'm totally objective about everything because they haven't examined themselves.
Heather, do you guys have strategies and tips for people to learn how to actually better deliver that information and get past those ideas of I don't want to be mean and it's actually going to help my team to do this?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, stop characterizing it as mean.
Yeah, really.
Right?
Good
It's like we
point.
hear
It's
this all the time.
helpful.
Oh, I was so harsh because I told them what I wanted them to do. It's like, that language, every time you say that, you're reinforcing this idea that, something about this behavior. And one of the things we've started talking to clients about is this notion of instructing. So to try and get comfortable with this is that when you're giving direction to someone as a leader, think about it as you are instructing and teaching. So, because if I think of myself in that instructing role, then maybe I'm not going to feel like I'm micromanaging, right? I'm instructing because I want you to get it right. And so that's the first step, is really focusing in on that instruction piece. So we talk about it in terms of define and then direct, right? Don't just give them information, but actually direct what it is they're doing. And so there's an element of instruction to it. And then the second piece is, as you are involved with people, there is this aspect of what we call coaching. It's part of one of the leadership approaches that we encourage clients to use, but it's a little bit different from what a lot of people, the way coaching has sort of evolved to, ask them questions so that you can figure it out. We use more of that coaching, like, if you imagine a football coach and he or she is working with a quarterback. And they don't just tell the quarterback to go off and, throw the ball in a particular way. They stay there, they observe, they correct, right? They correct how they're doing it, their timing. They give them this feedback and this information so they can take it in and continue to improve their performance to a place of mastery. So that's the place that leaders have to spend more time in, right? Is that I need to give the instruction and then I need to stay with them and continue to have that conversation. And then it starts to be more comfortable, right? Because I'm not this big bad person that's, giving them consequences because they haven't done it right. I'm in there and I'm investing myself in making sure that my employee can actually follow through. And if they're not, then I realign them. All I'm doing, that's what the coach is doing with the quarterback, realigning what they're doing, how they're doing it to get to the best possible outcome. So we try to change sometimes the words we use and the way we think about it to make it more comfortable for us. Right. And that's why we've been having a lot of conversations the last few years, because since I guess, how long was it? And we wrote our book, So You Think You Can Lead, basically around this idea that leaders were being so permissive that nobody was managing performance. And we need to move leaders back into that place of really directing and governing performance. And so the language and really thinking and being intentional about it so that we don't have to then judge ourselves as, micromanaging, being mean, being harsh. It's like, no, you're being a boss. That's it, right? Like, when did being a boss become a bad thing to be, right?
Well, I like that perspective because our words have power, right? And if we're telling ourselves that we're being mean, then we're kind of, even if it's subconsciously, kind of going into it with that mindset.
Absolutely.
So and I'll get each of your perspectives on this. I like to give listeners an action item. So what's one piece of advice that you would give somebody that they can apply to, themselves, their business, their own dysfunctional processes? What's one piece of advice you'd give to somebody?
Well, because we come at all of our work from a developmental perspective. We see development as a continuum that human beings are on, that a business is on, that our career is on. And that if we view our performance through the lens of a developmental context and not as a character flaw, we can really release ourselves from things like the imposter syndrome, where that belief that runs it is, if something goes wrong, there must be something wrong with me. If I'm not perfect enough, then horrible things are going to happen to me. But that anything we do on that developmental continuum can be improved over time with experience, with the help that we need, and the help that other people, like leaders, really want to give to their employees. And so releasing themselves from the imposter syndrome so that they can actually grow and achieve their potential.
Heather, what about you?
And for me, I'm gonna talk about this place that we end up going into of feeling and acting and even telling ourselves that we're powerless. So we all have that innate power, our own, sort of that personal power and authority. So when we are in a situation, so if you look around any situation that you are in where you are telling yourself, there's nothing I can do about it. I can't change it. I just have to put up with it. Those are all places and times that you are saying to yourself that you are powerless. And so really challenge yourself on that. What is the authority that I have? What am I entitled to in all of this? So that we start to take action, even if it's small action, even if it's imperfect action, right? Doesn't mean that it's always going to correct itself, kind of the first thing we try. But it's like, if I'm complaining and feeling frustrated and limited, and then I'm going along with it and I'm adapting to it, as opposed to going, okay, what do I need to do to change this? That's what we want you to start with. Like, that to me is like, and that is in any and every aspect of your life, is the second that you stop telling yourself that you're powerless to do anything about it. And again, that keeps you safe and small, and your brain likes that. But if we're going to play and go after our potential, then it's really starting to think about, what is the power that I have to do something here, even if it's just something small, and what is it that I'm entitled to in this? Because oftentimes we forget that we're entitled to say no. We're entitled to say, that doesn't work for me. We're entitled to say, please don't talk to me like that, right? And so recognizing that there are these things that we have the power to do to make a difference in any situation we're in.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing not only your story, but all this very insightful information on how we can get better ourselves and within our organization. And I'll put the links to all your guys' social media and website and stuff in the show notes. But what's the best way for people to reach out if they have questions, or just follow along to what you guys are doing?
We typically direct folks to our website, janetsaris-hilliard.com. So hopefully you can put that in the show notes. So I won't spell it out if you're listening. And everything is, all of our information about our books, our podcasts, our YouTube channel and videos, all of our programs, lots of great contact, and there's information on contacting us directly. So
awesome. Well, thanks again. It was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having us, Jordan.
Thanks for having us, Jordan. Very awesome questions.